When I used to play Call of Cthulhu with a couple of friends, we were fairly new to TTRPGs, except the DM and the DM's best friend. We ended up inviting this guy because we needed players, and he's in a campaign that DM's, best friend forever. How did I not know that? Anyway, yeah, his best friend forever runs. An hour into the game, me and my friends have barely gotten to do anything because this new guy repeatedly starts talking during our turns, asking if he can make rolls, trying to get us to do things we wouldn't want to do, etc. Plus, he would take a good chunk of time just to do his turn and would do nothing to advance the story and constantly try to steer us away from the story of our characters. A bit later into playing, my character throws his character down the stairs at a ghost. I was so done with him, but that didn't work. I also kind of regret it, but it stopped the ghost. And hey, his character survived. So eventually, because we played over Discord, we all just muted him. The funny part is, we could see him trying to talk constantly, but we wouldn't unmute him because we were finally able to play. He later threw a giant fit and ended up getting booted out of our group. We were gonna kick him out anyway, and he was also kicked out of the group our DM's best friend forever runs. It just goes to show, when you act dismissive of your fellow group members, those same group members are not going to be incentivized to keep you around. And if one of those group members happens to be your other DM, well, you might want to say goodbye to your other campaign too. Instead of a tavern, we started out in the wild between settlements in the fantasy apocalypse. Staying outside settlements was very dangerous due to high numbers of monsters, which were generally avoided by living in highly fortified cities or on sky islands with travel done by airship or underground magic trams. All things considered, it was a good idea for a setting, and starting out as the sole survivor of an airship crash beats brooding in a tavern corner and harassing the barmaid. I wouldn't say the group hit it off very well though. We roleplayed with a little bit of, I don't know these people yet energy, but we pulled through fairly well with very good RP between our fighter and our rogue. Then, the fighter proposed we focus on working together and making it to the nearest settlement, which sounded like DM cut Drew Sar out of Critical Role and then put the 5 spires from that city into just like a lake. We came to an agreement that this was the best course of action for all involved, and we began our traveling. DM then put the plot hook in a boot and kicked us in the direction of plot events, which wasn't an issue. DM had told us he was going to have a central plot, and at times would force us into exploring/discovering hooks. In this case, a stampede of some kind of cow-shaped, horned sheep things being chased by raptor-like beasts cut our intended path off, and we were presented with foot-racing creatures sprinting an estimated 100 feet a turn, dodging into what looked like a partially collapsed mine entrance or MacGyvering our own solution. We decided we would go into the mine, which collapsed some more behind us. Quick examination told us we could dig our way out, but this would take some hours. But we definitely dodged the stampedes that way. A call for a history roll also told us we knew more about the mine. It was a known shortcut parties traveling by foot used to cut through the mountain range. We were looking for a mountain pass before, and it was a bit odd that this mine wasn't mentioned before, but, oversights. We decided to have our rogue scout ahead for the party. My sorcerer had message, and the spell didn't need line of sight, so we decided he'd be around 90-ish feet ahead of us, and I would cast message every 15 seconds or so to keep a line of communication. That way, we were far enough behind that we wouldn't immediately give away our position, and we'd allow our rogue to do some scouting. If he ran into trouble, he was a single dash plus bonus action dash away from us, and worst case scenario, we would reach him in 2 turns or so. We pat ourselves on the back with this ingenious plan, and we continued on. Rogue ran to some goblins and had the pleasure of rolling a nat 1 with bonuses, but he still failed to beat the passive perception of one of the goblins, who called to alert the rest of the green buddies. DM then proceeded to tell the rogue to roll initiative, and that this was him against 6 goblins, which we pointed out with our message system and our prearranged plans for rogue to retreat at the first sign of trouble. DM then responds by explaining that I hadn't been announcing that I was casting message. When fighter countered with rogue still being able to fall back to us, he said the goblins would chase him. We then had to point out that rogue would outrun them with dash plus bonus action dash. Eventually, rogue was allowed to link up with us. We beat the goblins by bottlenecking them into a narrow bit of corridor on the used battle map, and after looting their bodies for usable stuff, mainly arrows and a few spare daggers for throwing, we began to notice DM's payback. Every time we didn't mention something, he would assume we didn't do it. A section of the mine was flooded with gas and home to an air elemental. If during the fight we didn't explicitly mention we held our breath every single turn. Con save versus poison. We had to cross an underground lake, but fighter had to wade through part of it when pushing one of the rafts we found. He didn't mention drying his pants, though I did say I used prestidigitation to warm and dry it. DM tried to have him roll against a coal. Like, dude, come on. During our rest at an abandoned storage room, we kept a fire going by the door under a ventilation shaft. DM tried to give us smoke poisoning because we didn't check the vent for blockages, and he didn't mention the smoke not clearing even after we specifically looked for a vent to put the fire by so the smoke had places to go. The session ended and Fighter pulled everyone into a private convo to ask if anyone else felt DM was taking it too far. Consensus was yes, and we told DM and asked if we could have a discussion next session with everyone present. The server disappeared the next day. We had a slow chat among ourselves, but no one felt up to taking the DM coat. Look, a big part of DMing is creating problems for your players to overcome, which is why I get really confused when DMs get upset when players do the overcoming. The players here are being smart. They clearly show care and attention, and they are showing extensive planning. These are all great things. I love it when my players do this because it shows that they really care about my games and the world that I'm building up. They care about the rules and are generally following them and using their creativity to play. I love seeing that. Sure, sometimes players can be using that creativity to basically just bait for advantage on rolls and stuff, but that's clearly not what these players are doing. And punishing them by just taking everything they need to do literally is just, well, it's just annoying. Needing to announce every single thing you do does not make the game more fun. It just makes it more cumbersome. And, well, if a game is cumbersome, it's not going to be worth playing. This event happened in mid-2020. Our group's Forever GM wanted to playtest a third-party urban fantasy setting for D&D 5th edition. A mutual friend and I both agreed to join. The DM posted an LFG online and found 2 more people, one of whom was our problem player. The person played a Hexblade Warlock, so we'll call them Hex. Here's a summary of the adventure's plot for context. Our party of 4 was a group of stage performers who got caught up in a freak storm on the road and got sent back in time 30 plus years to the late 1980s. This incident was tied to a ritual performed by a group of RPG-playing teens in this earlier time period. The teens summoned a devil for power to fight against commercial construction, threatening their families' homes and businesses. The party's main goal was to find a way back to the present day before the timelines disentangled themselves. During the investigation, the party discovered the motivations and conflicts driving the NPCs and could choose to help, hinder, or ignore. In Session 0, the group established that Hex's player character had a background as a diplomat. However, as soon as the adventure was underway, that idea got shunted aside as Hex proved himself unable to stick to a consistent personality. What we got instead was him bouncing between different flavors of edgelord: churlish, aloof, and gloomy. Upon realizing he was in the past, Hex immediately said he was a time traveler to the first NPC he met. When they reacted with skepticism, he decided to gather information more subtly about eldritch beings, which just confused that NPC. Hex tended to jump to conclusions from a single clue, and sometimes jump to conclusions with no clues. He would then struggle to ask another player character for their opinion on the subject, only to double down on his hypothesis if we suggested anything that wasn't in direct agreement with him. Later in the investigation, after the party fought off a shadowy assailant, Hex whined about the encounter to a friendly NPC. When he was told that this put the NPC on edge, he continued to divulge the party's discoveries and made the NPC even more frightened. On 2 occasions, Hex challenged an unfriendly NPC to a duel. The first time was a preppy jock type who called Hex out for flirting with the jock's girlfriends. The second time was the police captain after the party found hints of a conflict of interest. In both cases, Hex was outclassed and knocked out. The second incident would have killed him had another player character not intervened at the last moment. Hex also flip-flopped on his view on money. In Session 1, when the party rolled into town and checked into a motel, Hex said he just needed a closet to sleep in. Oddly, this was just before the player characters realized they had to be conscious of how much period-appropriate cash they had on hand. The very next morning in-game, Hex insisted on overpaying and tipping big to impress people, including buying a fine suit and getting it tailored too. He justified this as, a good connection isn't a waste of money. This included flirting, which led to that jock encounter mentioned above. The setting included a new spell to interact with digital networks, so the DM allowed the player characters to plug in personal devices inside their tour bus to access a cached version of the internet. Hex tried to exploit this to get rich by looking up lottery numbers, stock prices, and collectible toys. This would be clever in a long-term campaign, but he paid too much attention to it to do a play test and prioritized it over searching for plot-relevant information. Hex's most aggravating behavior was retconning his player character's backstory for each new challenge, then claiming he should be able to solve the problem without needing to roll dice. The GM was often willing to negotiate, but wasn't afraid to put his foot down when Hex reached too far. Need to talk to an important local figure? Hex was from a family of noble diplomats, which gave him lots of money and connections. Need to investigate construction plans? Hex's family ran an island resort and taught him business and architecture. Found evidence of drugs? Hex's family owned a pharmacy and taught him medicine. Need to deal with police or criminals? The family and their business were organized like the mafia and helped authorities chase other criminal syndicates off their island. Found evidence of demons? Hex's ancestors were demon hunters who passed down a powerful heirloom he wielded as his packed weapon. Also, it had the power to steal souls, and his mentor's soul was trapped inside of it too. One scene in particular best illustrates Hex's wishful thinking in getting the best results with the least effort. He had a one-on-one encounter with a lesser devil who had possessed one of the teens involved in the summoning ritual. Hex wanted to do an exorcism, but he didn't have any leverage to compel the fiend, and using force would risk the girl's life. Instead, they made a deal where Hex had 24 hours to sacrifice a life in exchange for the lesser devil agreeing not to harm its host. Hex immediately tried to find someone whose death would have no consequence to the town, but the DM told him both in and out of character that such a person wouldn't be walking out in the open. Hex then rephrased his question each time the answer wouldn't go to his satisfaction, dragging out the solo scene. The DM practically had to trick Hex into just choosing a target by pointing him to a house that looked lived in but run down and cluttered. While snooping around, Hex was cornered by an inhabitant. He took the kill, then discovered his victim was the parent of one of the teens. Of course, Hex protested that this isn't what he wanted, though the DM pressed on by pointing out context clues relevant to the main investigation. In the adventure's finale, the party had to complete a ritual that would both open a time portal and banish an eldritch being that was trying to manifest. During the fight, Hex took a big hit that dropped him to 0 hit points, and the GM said the creature's ability ripped out the target's soul, killing them instantly. The party finished the ritual and leaped into the portal with Hex's body in tow. The GM concluded the adventure with a sequel hook, the surviving player characters discovering they jumped too far forward in time and now were in the late 2050s, while Hex's soul was tethered to the ritual site. The GM later admitted to me that he misread the enemy stat block and the creature actually needed another turn to soul steal a down player character, but he thought Hex's conduct didn't deserve rolling back the mistake. And now, a brief epilogue. The GM, bless his heart, wanted to give Hex another chance as a player. Oh, well, to each their own, I guess. We did not want to invite Hex back to the usual RPG group, so the DM sent out another LFG and set up a Discord for a separate group of online players which included Hex. The GM had written a homebrew setting for a semi-aquatic world and wanted to do a dungeon crawl based on an AD&D module, so he ran the adventure for both groups in parallel. One event that I was privy to was that Hex and I were the player characters in our respective groups to grab a cursed sword that grafted to the wielder's arms, making them constantly hungry but able to taste whatever the blade cuts. At one point, Hex posted an out-of-character complaint that the other player characters distrusted him to the point of wanting to cut off his player character's arms to remove the sword. My guess is that Hex played up the curse as an excuse to rock the boat for the other players. Our group completed the dungeon crawl and wanted to do some further world building, but the other group barely finished the dungeon before the DM nuked the Discord server. The DM's dedication to allowing Hex to play D&D is very staggering, to say the least, but still, dedication is respectable even if it definitely did not work out. Hex seems to want to win the game, or at the very least be the center of attention, though neither mentality is very good. D&D isn't really about either of those things. Winning is a little bit more ephemeral when you're playing an imagination game like D&D. You win when you create a fun story with your friends, not when you beat everything by tiring out your DM with literary inertia. Now, I have advocated for backstories and your character being flexible. If you're not having fun with your character, there's nothing wrong with changing them with DM approval. However, these changes go a little bit beyond what we were thinking, especially since this all seems to happen in a mini-campaign or maybe even a one-shot playtest. This isn't exactly a long-form game where your decisions have massive consequences. And yeah, I do usually advise people take issues out of game instead of trying to solve them in-game. However, again, like I said earlier, this seems to be a mini-campaign or a one-shot, and if you're gonna screw around with a problem player, I guess this would be the place. Even with the DM's soul stealing of our problem player's player character, he still gave him a second chance. Shame it didn't work out. Hey y'all, hope this is the right sub for this story. I'm currently running a campaign in my own in-development P&B system for my wife and her siblings. A friend of mine also joined in the beginning. My wife and her siblings have never played any TTRPGs before, and got their first experience in this campaign. My friend has years of experience as both a game master and a player, though we never played in a campaign together before. I've got a few years of playing several TTRPGs, and a lot more GMing under my belt, but only ever encountered a problem player once before. Wife plus siblings are very non-confrontational and rather introverted. They create characters that sound like fun to them. Friend instantly tried his best to min-max in the unfinished system, which helped me balance some stuff. The big problem began when it came down to role-playing and group decisions. Friend is on one hand very pushy to progress the session and sometimes just does what my character would do before waiting for the others to decide their own actions. On the other hand, he sometimes just grinds progress to a halt when it comes to talking to NPCs. He belittles every single NPC. I tried different personalities, tried tying them with their backstories. It was always the same, and it stopped the party from gathering information through NPCs. My wife learned to step in from time to time, but his characters were so dominant and sometimes aggressive that she's a bit intimidated to get in their way too. Her siblings are even worse at not stepping in. My biggest case of problem player came in the form of two very unnecessary, angry, in-character outbursts. My problem player friend's character once beat a stewardess unconscious because she didn't reply fast enough. And when a woman on the same plane stepped up to him after he shouted orders without an explanation to the people, they're playing Monster Hunters, and tried to get a situation under control inside of that plane, he just beat her to the ground. It happened too quickly for the others to react since they were occupied with other stuff. They were labeled as hostiles after landing. The other outburst was in today's session. They found a weird body without a head. The body was frozen in time. The head was laying on the ground. After they found out the head was still alive and could be reconnected with the body in a little bit of time, not even much time for them, he grabbed the body and threw it into a trap, completely impaling it on spikes. There were enemy corpses laying around, completely looted and all. It was just incredibly mean, and the head that the body belonged to didn't really want to give any information to any of them afterwards. My wife and I are going to talk to her siblings about this tomorrow, but I just need random internet opinions to validate my feelings of this being problematic behavior. I'm still finding my balance as a game master in my own TTRPG system, and this behavior is really taking a blow to my enjoyment of the sessions. We tried talking to him about the plane incident. His response and solution was to turn his character into a paper cutout without any personality, agency, or care in the world / story or characters. His characters so far all felt exactly the same, and he told me that he plays this archetype the most. Oh, by the way, thank you for the insight. I talked to him and presented my problems to him again. We agreed that he would leave the group, and I'll probably still ask him for advice on certain mechanical decisions for the system. You helped me a lot, since this was stressing me out. Look at that. A problem player and a horror story solved in an amicable way. Was this the worst story ever? No. This problem player is a more, I guess, gruesome form of the instigator that we see a lot. Players that instigate negative situations and can at times ruin the fun for other players. And by at times, I mean the vast majority of the time, ruining the fun for other players. That is absolutely what's happening here. We've got a player who is creating these very hostile situations, and it's making it difficult for the DM and the players to enjoy the game. Now, while I wish this player could simply make a character that would fit better into the campaign and wouldn't be so instigatory and change their behavior to fit more in line with what the DM has in mind, this is also an amicable solution. If the player wants to leave, that's okay. Sometimes the best solution for all parties is to simply walk in two different directions, and here, I think that was a good solution for all. I hope the OP and all involved good fortune in their future sessions. The game, Dragon of Icespire Peak. The cast, DM, the Dungeon Master, guy with a little bit of experience as a player, but a first-time DM. Struggled at times to keep the plates spinning, but overall did alright for his first time. Ronnie, the Elven Rogue, and the story's problem player. Alex, the Tiefling Bard, and the main recipient of the problem player's problems. Joker, funny guy, raising class, doesn't really matter. Me is me, I'm a human female sorceress. Our DM set the stage for our adventure by having us go into Phandolin's tavern one at a time as a sort of character introduction scene. The first person into the tavern is Ronnie, and he proceeds to find a dark corner to quietly observe everyone else from. I don't like the dark, brooding, loner rogue cliche, but at least Ronnie was role-playing it, so I was optimistic. Still better than a flavorless, I fire my bow, bonus action hide approximation of a character. Next, Alex's tiefling bard enters the tavern with a bit of a flourish, sits down at the bar, and orders a drink. But before Alex can pay, Ronnie jumped up from the corner and offers to pay for the pretty lady's drink. Alex hadn't been described as good-looking, mind you. It's a trope for high charisma characters, but good looks and charisma don't have to go hand in hand. What Alex's player also didn't mention was the character's gender. Alex's player is female, but actually, Alex is a guy, she explained. But thanks for the drink, handsome. I always have been partial to the dark, mysterious type. Ronnie's player was mortified at accidentally flirting with another male character and quickly had him slink back into a shadowy corner. When my character, who I described as rather beautiful and elegantly dressed, sat down next to Alex, he gave a similar flirtatious introduction. Oh wow, look at you! Bards up and down the Sword Coast must sing songs of your beauty. Before I could respond, Ronnie's player had to speak up. Wait. I thought Alex was gay. Why was he hitting on me if he's into chicks? I was a bit taken aback by this response, but I think Alex's player was more used to it and coolly explained that Alex is bisexual. You never know who you're going to encounter, so I wanted to keep the roleplay open to as many options as possible. Ronnie then said, okay, yeah, whatever, but can we keep real-world politics out of this game? This is supposed to be light adventure. Yeah, apparently being bisexual is not a personal sexual identity, but rather a political stance. The air was a bit tense, but our fourth problem player, Joker, came in with, I sit down at the bar next to the pretty sorceress lady and the pretty tiefling guy, take off my blue math cap and store it in my bag as a sign of respect to the tavern keep, a jokey reference to a Democratic candidate. After those introductions, we're off to our first quest, delivering word of a dangerous dragon in the area to a nearby midwife. She's been harassed by a manticore, so we scare it off, and it's pretty basic level 1 stuff. Ronnie tells us to go talk to the midwife while he patrols on the edge of the forest in case the manticore comes back. I object that we shouldn't split the party, but Ronnie insists. I'm sure you're more than capable of handling an old woman. Actually, the DM chimes in, Adabra Gwen is a relatively young and somewhat attractive woman if you like that wholesome farmer's daughter thing. At this point, Ronnie suddenly agrees that splitting the party is a bad idea and wants to go talk to Adabra to make sure she doesn't try to cheat us or anything. We're just here to deliver a message, I explained, and it should be up to Alex to take the lead because of her high social stats. The others agreed, and Ronnie went back to his loner patrol. Next up, we took the Gnomenguard quest. The gnome settlement is ruled by a pair of married kings, which really got under Ronnie's skin. I thought we agreed, no real-world politics, he said. Look, it's in the module, the DM continued. 2 kings being married doesn't sound like real-world politics anyway. It sounds more like, fantasy politics. It's not like it says one of the kings cheated on his previous king with, like, a porn star. Someone suggested we get back to the quest because some of the loot sounded cool, and we were able to finally move on. A bit later, though, Ronnie said, I think out of character, but looking back, I'm not certain, I wonder if there could even be gay tieflings. We all responded with silence, which he took as an opportunity to elaborate. I mean, tieflings are like the intentional creation of demons to propagate the demonic bloodline. They wouldn't make gay tieflings since that would, defeat the whole purpose, I don't think it works like that, the DM said. There'd probably be tiefling lesbians, though, Ronnie continued, because historically lesbian women have still been married off and bore children, so it really wouldn't matter. Whoa! That escalated faster than a train wreck. Holy crap. We probably should have said something about this to Ronnie. Maybe even talked about booting him from the game, but none of us were particularly confrontational, and this was at the very end of the session, so the DM just said, well, a good point to wrap up, and see y'all next week. That was really the worst of it, but there was an air of awkwardness for the rest of the campaign. Alex, Joker, and I were getting along with plenty of jokes between us, and Ronnie uninterested in anything unless he thought there was a chance for slay, pay, or lay. At one point, he even tried to flirt with the ghost of a sea elf we were trying to put at ease. A ghost, flirting with a distraught, accursed ghost. Dude either needs a Pornhub account or he needs to delete his Pornhub account. I'm not sure which. And as a sidebar, if you've played Icespire Peak, then you know not to flirt with the ghost, because she will give you crabs. The campaign eventually came to a conclusion with us defeating the titular dragon of Icespire Peak. We raided its dragon horde and made our way back to Phandalin, returning as conquering heroes. So who's at the tavern when we get back? Ronnie asked. I'm not sure why, the DM responded. Well, it's normal for the hero to get the girl at the end of the story, right? I guess that's a common trope, but Phandalin a small town, only 100 or so people. It's kind of slim pickings. Ronnie and his player both sulked, as the other three of us regaled the nearly empty tavern with tales of our conquest. The DM then hits us with an epilogue he homebrewed. 3 days later, we're recovering from our post-victory hangovers. A half-dozen very ornate carriages come into town. The Lord of Neverwinter has heard of our conquest and has sent down one of the middling nobles, Count It Matters Not. Along with him came several knights and lords and ladies from the royal court. This got Ronnie's attention real quick. He got himself dressed and out of the shadows and rushed up to Count Who Cares, obviously hoping he could make a good impression and woo a noble woman. Count, no one remembers the name, asked about the source of the treasure, and Ronnie bragged about killing a fearsome dragon. He asked about the amount of treasure, and Ronnie boasted loudly of his wealth. Count forget about it, asked to confirm the treasure was from the dragon's horn, and Ronnie once again boasted about his heroism and his wealth. Then Count didn't take notes, informed us that by royal decree signed 10 years ago, Lord Neverremember has claimed 30% of any slain dragon hoard, and we need to pay our adventuring taxes. The rest of us thought this was a funny way to end. The campaign was over, so we couldn't use the money anyways. Ronnie was not having it though. He tried every angle he could to argue why his imaginary money shouldn't be subject to an imaginary tax. Phandalin's a poor town, he said. People should be happy to have us here spending our coin. If I'm taxed, I'll take the rest, go to another city and spend it there. But if I stay and spend the money, everyone here will prosper. Roll persuasion, the DM said. But before he could, Alex chimed in. Wait, I don't think that's allowed. Everyone was confused because it's not like this was covered in the rules. Why not? I can make a persuasion check, Ronnie said. It's against the house rules, Alex answered. The DM did not have a clue. What house rule? This isn't PvP. He's trying to persuade an NPC. Yeah, but this sounds a lot like Reaganomics and Trickle Down, and we agreed there'd be no real-world politics in the game. Joker, Alex, and I thanked DM for running a great campaign. Later, I asked DM about what he decided on the taxes. Oh, yeah, I booted Ronnie from the server, then seized his gold and used it to fund the Neverwinter's first shelter for LGBT tiefling youth. A little bit of delicious, malicious compliance to end the story. If you want a bit more, you can check out the post. There's a tad more wonderful mockery if you want to give OP a little bit of karma. This is a fun post. But anyway, look guys, lore accuracy should not come before fun. The lore of D&D can be changed. This is an imagination game. And also on top of that, I just don't think that's lore accuracy anyway. The guy, I think, was just making that up to be a dick. Of course, there are definitely times where you want to stick to the world. You don't want sci-fi robots in your fantasy setting if that's not something that you're interested in. My games don't have Aarakocra in them for a variety of reasons, but one of them is lore. I haven't written anything for Aarakocra, and if somebody were to introduce one into my game, there's not much background I could use, and I'd be forced to just take from Forgotten Realms, which I could regret later on if I rushed to accept something into my world that I don't want in the future. It is a balancing act, but the absolute no-no is weaponizing lore against one of your fellow players, which is absolutely what this guy is doing. Weaponizing made-up lore is just even worse. At the end here, the guy didn't really have any reason to stick around. He wasn't giving the party any reason to keep him around. I'm sure he'd say that he just had a disagreement with one of the players, but that disagreement is about somebody's fundamental existence, and that disagreement isn't worth having at all. Alright, and that's going to be it for today's episode of RPG Horror Stories. If you guys enjoyed it, then please do leave a like. If you want to see more of my content, then you can check out Q and Play, where I answer your questions in a rambly, unscripted format while playing some video games. And while you're there in the cards, subscribe to Crispy's Tavern to get more of our content right as it comes out. And finally, if you want to leave your own stories or thoughts, go down to the comments down below. If you can't think of a comment, leave the comment. It's not that deep, dude, to let me know you made it to the end of the video. In essence, like, comment, subscribe. I will see you all next time. Farewell.